Hey everybody, it's Eric Live alongside Rod. Excited to welcome back to the Final Fours on the schedule, ESPN analyst Jay Bilas. Jay, thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So we are live on YouTube, and I will try and monitor the chat. So if you have any questions and I have time to get to it, we'll see what we can do. The other obvious thing, if you're someone who watches our show frequently, you'll notice that something seems off, and that's because I woke up yesterday morning with partial paralysis of my left face. I have Bell's palsy, so I do look a little weird. I think I sound okay, but if it hopefully I don't throw you off too much. It also makes reading small screens with like for the chat a little difficult for me since I can't blink and close my one eye. So bear with me as I as we try and get through the questions. All right. So, of course, most people are familiar with Jay through his work on ESPN with the perspective as a former college basketball player and assistant coach at Duke. But many may not be aware that he's also an attorney, which gives him probably a little better insight into the ever changing environment of college athletics over the past few years. We'll get into that in just a little bit. But first, let's talk about our favorite team, Michigan State. So, Chair, we'll open up with the most obvious question. We were a little surprised, but how surprised are you with the season that Michigan State had last year, making all the way to Elite Eight?
Yeah, I don't know that I was surprised. I think if you had asked me the first couple weeks of the season, would they have been in the Elite Eight? That might have surprised me a bit, but they continued to get better. And with so many, they had a few more new pieces than I was used to with some of the transfers that they had, Frankie Fiddler and all that. But, unsurprisingly, Tom Izzo and his staff figured it out. And having Jeremy Fears back was a big deal. But that was just a really fun team to watch. And I think their whatever they call it now, chemistry, wound up being really good by the end of the season. And they improved throughout the season defensively. Thought they became a very good shooting team, a good passing team, and they kept their turnovers to a minimum, and that had been an issue in the last several years of sort of turnover issues for Michigan State. But I think it was a great year, and it was just one of those years where the top, and it doesn't happen that often, but the top four teams were what I consider to be head and shoulders above everybody else.
Yeah.
And I think they proved that in the tournament with all four number one seeds making the Final Four, which had only happened once before, I think in 2008. So it was just one of those years. But Michigan State was as good as anybody else, I would say. But I wouldn't have I don't think I would have picked anybody. I picked all four number one seeds. That doesn't make me a genius or anything. But I'm not sure that anybody that was outside of that top four would have beaten anybody in the top four, in my view. Anything can happen in a one game scenario, but I
Sure.
just think they were just better.
Yeah, and we noticed we talked about this throughout the season, even like halfway through. It felt more like a traditional Michigan State team than they had been the last, previous couple of years. They're a lot faster paced than they'd been in the past, and they're rebounding at a clip that they really hadn't done for about 4 or 5 years previously. So it felt like kind of the old times. And so that's which, and more success too, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that was one of Tom Izzo's most talented teams, though.
No, I agree.
They certainly had talent. You don't get to the Elite Eight without talent,
Yeah,
but it wasn't overwhelming talent. So it was there was a blue collar aspect to the team, and that's probably true of most of their teams, if not all of them. But I do think the chemistry of the team was really good, and it was a group that didn't seem to care who got the credit, and that's something coaches like to say, but you don't always see it, and you kind of saw it with the Spartans last year.
So, zooming out a little bit to the Big Ten as a conference, and of course, that membership is changing all the time, it seems. So I'm not even sure how relevant it is, but the Big Ten gets a lot of criticism for not winning a national title for a quarter century since Michigan State did it in 2000. Do you think that there's anything to that notion that it's something the Big Ten has or hasn't been doing, or is it just a weird phenomenon that doesn't have an easy explanation beyond bad luck?
Yeah, I mean, I do think there's a luck component to it because the Big Ten has knocked on the door so many times with Final Four and
hmm
championship game appearances. whether it's Michigan, you name all the teams that have done
Yeah, right.
extraordinarily well over the
I think
years.
it's been 7 times, actually,
Yeah.
if I remember correctly.
So I didn't know the exact number, so thank you.
Yeah.
But and Michigan State's done the same. They've been there since the 2000 national championship. It's kind of hard to believe it's that long ago
Yeah.
Yeah.
that Izzo cut the nets down in when they beat Florida. But they've knocked on the door. The league has knocked on the door so many times. I don't think it's any big deal in that regard because you can make the same argument about. I mean, the Pac-12 had to deal with that for a long time too. Um, the ACC and the Southeastern Conference have been really good over the years, and they've had more teams break through and win it. I get that. But I don't think it's any systemic issue with the league or style of play or anything like that. Because if that were true, I think you'd see fewer Final Four and championship game appearances on the part of the league if that were a clear issue. It's like criticizing Gonzaga for
Right.
not winning a championship when they've been in two title games and Final Fours and all these Elite Eights. I always kind of push back on that notion that, oh, they've got an easy league and all that stuff. And I go, well, how do you explain their tournament success is better than all these big conferences? So when they get thrown in the deep end of the pool, they can swim. But we're blaming the league they play in or crediting the league with giving them all their success, and those are just facile interpretation issues. And I think same thing with the Big Ten and some of the criticism that the league takes for not putting the cherry on top of it.
Right.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I'm glad that doesn't, you're dampening our moods, which reminds me, it is, if you need to work on your gutters, you need to contact the Brothers Adjust Your Gutters. They can take care of all the water issues off your house. If you need leaf guards, you need downspout corrections, or just some replaced, contact the brothers. They can take care of everything, whether you're on the east side or the west side of the state of Michigan. Head on to our support page to get 10% off if you mention Final Four. That's at tffinots.com/support. All right, so let's back up even more, a little bit broader in the Big Ten. The coaching, been a lot of coaching changes. Our opinion has been, in general, the last few years, the coaching has not been quite maybe as high caliber as it was about 10 years ago. And now we've had a lot of changes. We got changes we've got McCollum coming into Iowa. We have DeVries coming to Indiana. We have Medved going to Minnesota and Buzz Williams going to Maryland. So a lot of changes and a lot of kind of big names and people have had a lot of success. Do you feel like the coaching is kind of cycling up in the conference as well? Or do you have an opinion on that at all?
No, it's always kind of a moving target there. It tends to, I don't know how many soothsayers there are at this. That okay, now the coaching is great in this league, and therefore you're going to see tremendous success. It's usually backward looking. They have success, and then we say, "What a great coach." I do think Buzz Williams is going to do a really good job at Maryland. Indiana has had their ups and downs over the years, and it's been a while since they've been a true contender year after year. So they need some stabilization, I think, and to have consistent success. DeVries is a good coach, and he's proven that. But it's one of those things. I mean, heck, he's been at three schools in 3 years now. So hopefully he's found a landing spot where he's going to stick around a while. And we'll see, how he does long term. But there are a lot of great attributes to IU's program, and they got great bones there. So there's no reason you can come up with that they shouldn't be successful long term.
Right.
But yeah, the league's coaches are very good. But they're really good. The SEC probably, if you went top to bottom, you'd probably suggest that there's not a league that has better coaches. There may be other leagues that can be competitive on that front, but I think the SEC is probably the clubhouse leader as far as coaching tenure, coaching success right now.
Yeah, we've had it very interesting. So my father's an alum of Drake University in Des Moines, and it's very interesting that three of the four coaches in the Big Ten are all from Drake, Medved and DeVries, and then McCollum just coached a year there. So very unusual.
Yeah, it's the new Tulsa,
I guess so.
Launching pad of coaches.
Cradle of cultures. Yeah. I wanted to ask a quick follow-up about Ben McCollum, actually, to get your take on that, because he had just incredible success for a decent stretch of time. at the D2 level before he got the Drake job, and now obviously has been hired at Iowa. Do you think that there's been maybe too much of a hesitancy on the part of Division I athletic directors to dip down into the D2 level? Because to me, when you look at what he accomplished there, it just screamed this guy has to be some level of a good coach. And, we'll see how he does at Iowa, but obviously the start at Drake was phenomenal. Do you think there's just too much hesitancy in that regard?
That's an interesting question. I don't know that it's hesitancy as much as it is just maybe a lack of a spotlight when you're making a decision to give a Big Ten program, or when you name the power conference, pardon me, to give that kind of job to someone. I mean, you could look back to Wisconsin and all the success that Bo Ryan had
Sure.
at Wisconsin Platteville. There are certainly examples of coaches on the quote unquote lower level that have distinguished themselves. That you go, hey man, this guy can coach. It doesn't matter the level. And I've been one that kind of pushed back over the years on the idea that college coaches can't make it in the NBA. That used to be a theme. And but I always felt like, well, wait a minute, the college coaches that are taking NBA jobs are usually taking bad jobs. So of
Right.
course they're going to have a difficulty.
Right.
And if you looked at people that had nothing but NBA experience, there were a lot of them that were miserable failures. So to me that means nothing. I think any job you're always looking for the right person for the job. And Iowa feels like they've got the right person, and we'll see how he does, and I'm sure he'll do very well. Maybe it'll bring ties back into vogue. That's the most interesting thing to me is will coaches go back to wearing a coat and tie? I know I wouldn't. I wear a coat and tie to every game, and if they let me wear a half zip, that's all I'd wear. Like I,
Right.
I just I never understood why coaches wore coats and ties all those years ago. And I remember when Tommy Amaker was at Michigan, he wore a polo shirt with a sport coat over it. He got criticized for it.
I
And his
remember.
thing was, I like to wear the logo too. Why can't I wear it? And so we'll see what happens with Iowa when that starts a trend of everybody wearing a tie again. I doubt
Well,
it, but we'll
yeah.
see.
And then you bring Buzz Williams in too, right? I mean he's got the pocket square too. I think he's got the whole 9 yards.
Oh, he's got not only pocket square, he's got a vest.
That's right.
And Buzz, there have been times where he had to change during halftime because he would sweat so much. That didn't harken too far. Now he can harken back to Gary Williams back when Gary would sweat through his suit in his Maryland days, and even before that when he was at Ohio State and Boston College and all that stuff. So yeah, it'll be fun to watch. It's kind of an interest. I always think it's kind of funny. Like I work with Reese Davis, who is his sartorial splendor, and he would. I think if he were put under truth serum, he would say that everybody that goes to a game, like he'd want everybody dressed like Connie Mack, including fans. Fans should wear coat and ties, like back in the
Right.
1930s or something when they went to a ball.
Derbies, right? Yeah.
Men in
Yeah, Paul
hats. Yeah.
Brown, Paul Brown or Tom Landry. Let's
Yeah.
go back to everybody wearing suits.
So, as I know you are well aware, over the last several years, in general, we've heard a lot of dire predictions about the loss of interest from the public in the wake of things like player compensation via NIL, the portal allowing for instant eligibility for transfers, et cetera. But at least from what I see, the ratings and attendance, the metrics that we use to measure interest about the sport don't seem to reflect those concerns as having come to pass. How do you feel about the overall state of college basketball, the overall health of the game as we sit here in 2025?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I never bought into that nonsense that, if players get compensated, all of a sudden people turn away, that amateurism was the reason that college sports was popular because it differentiated the product from, the NBA, the NFL, and the like. I always thought that was nonsensical. The enterprise, if you want to call it that, made a decision decades ago that they were going to be a multi-billion-dollar entertainment industry run off college campuses. And if people didn't turn away with a coach making $8, $10 million a year, they're certainly not going to be bothered by players making money. Um, I do think people, especially of a certain age, which is probably my age group, frankly,
Hmm.
um, like to think that the players are putting their academics first. I don't know that that's a necessary requirement. I don't, honestly, I don't, when I was a player back in the 1980s, I don't remember how I thought of myself. Did I think of myself, I'm a student first who just happens to be an athlete, like the NCAA says? I thought of myself as a basketball player, but I went to school, did my homework, got my degree, went to law school, got my degree. I cared about school, but like, the idea that you can't care about school and basketball or school and football or whatever it is kind of asinine. And, it didn't bother them to trot us out to money-making opportunities for themselves, but we couldn't do it on our own. When we had control of our free time to do whatever else we wanted, but as long as we didn't take any money. The whole thing was stupid. To your point on the metrics, you'll hear people complain, and I don't like this. Well, they still watch,
Yeah.
and so when you hear people say, "Well, I don't prefer this as a fan," so should the preferences of the fans dictate what the players are allowed to do? No, not in my view. I don't think I think this everything that has happened over the last several years has proven that the fans don't care whether the players make money or not. They don't care. They just want their games. And look, I said this decades ago that, and I think I used, if I remember right, I used when in the NFL when the officials were locked out. I thought it was a strike at one point, but it was a lockout. When they were locked out, because they wanted pensions and all that stuff, and they were having a disagreement with NFL ownership. They got locked out, so they had replacement officials, and they sucked, and it really affected the product. So, I as a fan of sports, I was complaining about like this sucks. When the lockout was ended, I didn't care whether the officials had their pensions or whether they're being treated fairly. I wanted the games, and I wanted
Hmm.
the games done the right way. And maybe that's a commentary on me that I should have been out there, in solidarity with the officials, but I wasn't. And I think it's the same way in college sports. Like the fans want their games. And that's what fans do. Like, when I go to the movies, I'm not going, hey, was the key grip taken care of in the union rules? No, I want to watch a movie. That's
Right.
up to them. And same thing with this. I don't think the fans ultimately really care. Like they say they care about the players' education. So I think for the most part they care, but it's further down the list. Because even Michigan State, Duke, where I went to school, most of the fans have no idea what the players are majoring in. They don't know. They like to think they know, but they don't, and they're not paying any attention to it.
Right. Yeah, it's a funny thing. We will occasionally hear in the Michigan State fan base reactions from people that will say things like, "Well, once Izzo's gone, I'm done. I'm not gonna pay attention to college athletics anymore." And I find kind of along the lines of what you were alluding to, what people will say they do and what they actually do are very often two different things. And to me, this is one of those areas that very much falls into that category.
That's my perspective as well. What people say, just don't listen to what they say. I say this in the NCAA all the time. Don't listen to what they say, watch what they do.
Right.
And I think the same is true of fans. Like, with all the people, and look, Jim Delaney's a good friend of mine, and I frankly is not a person in college sports I've respected and admired more over the years. But I think you'll remember years ago when the thought of player compensation was coming up, Jim was credited with saying, "Well, Big Ten won't participate. Like that'll be the end of it." And I was like, "Come on, man." Like that's not going to happen. You think
Right.
Ohio State's going to play Amherst at the Shoe for free
Right.
admission? Like they're not going to do that. And it's a multi-billion-dollar businesses don't fold up just because they have to compensate their employees. And we're in a period of transition right now, primarily because of a lack of leadership and vision on the part of the NCAA. They thought they were going to get away with violating federal antitrust law forever,
Yep.
and they finally got caught. And basically, the U.S. Supreme Court and other lower courts slapped their hand, and now they got to behave like other multi-billion-dollar industries in our country and comply with federal law. And it's really not that big of a deal. It's no game has been canceled. No check has failed to be cashed. Everything's fine. And now, do I think it's great that a player can transfer 3 or 4 times during a college career? No, I don't. I don't like it. But absent signing that player to a contract and coming to an agreement where the player agrees to stay in exchange for fair compensation, how can you tell somebody that's not under contract that they can't move around? And especially and I know people say, well, coaches and players are different. Well, they may be different in certain ways, but they're not that different. Coaches are like we mentioned, Darian DeVries. I mean, he's been at 3 schools in 3 years
Right.
and has signed multi-year contracts at each one of those schools. So really what this is about for players is, are the schools going to start signing players to multi-year contracts, and are those contracts going to be enforced? And I think we should, if a player signed to a contract, name a guy, Jeremy Fears. If Michigan State signs Jeremy Fears to a multi-year contract and Michigan makes him an offer for more money, well, then Michigan State should sue Michigan for tortious interference with contract. That's the way it works in the rest of the business world. It's
Yeah.
really not that difficult, and it can work really well in the college space if we would just kind of admit what we're doing here. This is just like the NFL and just like the NBA. There is no difference except the players are expected to be full-time enrolled as full-time students.
Right.
Yeah.
I always say to people when this comes up, if you want the limitations, so transfer limitations, for example, that's fine. You can have them. But the American way is we pay for that
Right.
or we agree to it. And
Right.
absent that, yeah, there's no justification for having any restrictions on freedom of mobility.
Absolutely, and that's where the NCAA came into
Right.
to problems, as they tried to do this and did it. To their credit, they did it for decades upon decades and got away with it. But they're not getting away with it anymore. And to your point, like somebody like me, I signed multi-year contracts with my employer, and I'm exclusive to my employer. But they pay you more to be exclusive than if you
Right.
can, just do whatever you're signed and then work for somebody else at the same time. They can't, you're going to have to bargain for that. And so going forward, like this House settlement has given the NCAA and the member institutions a few years maybe to kind of work out a long-term structure and what's gonna be best for everybody going forward. And there are a couple things that they can do. One, they can collectively bargain with the athletes. That comes with some challenges, but it can be accomplished. Where the players agree to a salary cap, they agree to certain conditions, just like they do in the NFL, the NBA, whatever. Or they can go to Congress, as they are doing, and beg Congress for an antitrust exemption that allows them to do what they want to do under the protection of federal law that would preempt all these different state laws. And I've been reading the same things you have, that maybe by presidential executive order something could be done, but it would have to be on a federal level like that. And that's really what the NCAA wants. They want Congress or the president to come in and do something that's going to give them cover, so they don't have to pay the players what they're worth.
I wanted to give you, I'm glad you brought all that up. We jumped one ahead. We were going to come to that, but we might as well deal with House anyway, since we're talking about it. But I wanted to give you a lot of credit. This winter, while House was going on, I found myself very confused by the NCAA's thinking, because I knew there's nothing in this settlement that's going to prevent antitrust lawsuits from continuing to be filed. So I'm like, well, what do you think you're really solving? And I heard you on Coach Krzyzewski's show on Sirius talking about this, and you were mentioning the idea that the NCAA's ultimate end game for this was getting Congress to give them an antitrust exemption. And the scales fell from my eyes at that point. I said, that's it. That's what they're doing. And I hadn't really thought that part through, that they were basically going to try to get Congress to do what they did for Major League Baseball way back in the early 20th century. What do you think, from your observation, is the likelihood of that happening? Because to me, I just can't see it, that Congress is going to care enough. Do you think it's a reasonable chance?
I do think it's a reasonable chance, but who knows? That chance could be 50-50. I don't think anything that Congress does is going to be palatable to anybody. There's going to be a lot of whatever they do, there'll be a lot of complaining about it because it's not going to be a perfect solution. So my sense is, and it's just a sense, I've been on Capitol Hill a couple times talking about this at the invitation of different legislators. And each time when I went there, I said, look, I'm not stumping for anybody's agenda here. I'll answer whatever questions people have of me, but I don't care. Like whatever you do, you do. I can give my perspective, but I'm not stumping for anything. But a few of the things I kind of learned was one, the legislators, that their staffs are probably more important than they are. The
Sure.
legislative aides and assistants know way more about this generally than the legislators do. That doesn't mean that certain legislators aren't really up on this, but not every, at least my experience, not everybody is. The second thing is the biggest question that I think people have on Capitol Hill is whatever they are to do, or if they were to do anything, how would they enforce it? Because
Hmm.
the government doesn't want to take on college sports and all of a
Right.
sudden have a
Right.
Department of College Sports that's a federal entity that is doing all this. And they certainly don't want to let the NCAA do it because they've seen the results of when the NCAA is in charge of their own henhouse, what happens there. And the third thing I would say is, the NCAA is asking for, what they're really asking for is give us what they call guardrails, which is a very nice word for restrictions. So allow us to restrict athletes. But I've never heard any administrator saying, look, we need to get our salaries in line. Like coaches are making too much, ADs are making too much. This is ridiculous. Because that would be my first question is if you're going to limit the players, then we need to limit everybody. Like if we're going to say there's too much money in the system that's being doled out to people, then my first thing go. So you're going to tell the players they're limited to this amount of money, and then you're going to tell the coaches, but you guys can make 10-20 million dollars a year, whatever it is. To me, that would be absurd, and that would bother me. I don't know how other people would feel, but that would really bother me.
I, I guess I just struggle to see where the political constituency is on either side of the aisle. Maybe I'm missing something in terms of backing what college administrators want to do in obtaining this exemption, imposing the guardrails. To me, if you're at least what the Republican Party purports to be in favor of, you're in favor of capitalism. You're in favor of business and being able to negotiate one's worth in exchange for one's labor, all of those things. And then on the other side, I think the Democrats traditionally have at least tried to position themselves as being against exploitation. So I guess I just struggle to see where the constituency is in Congress to back this. But if you think you've been there, so if you think there's a realistic possibility, I guess we got to treat that with some level of seriousness.
Yeah, I think those are all great points. I think it's just a question of whose narrative is going to win the day. So if the NCAA administrators, whether they be ADs or commissioners or whatever, NCAA office people are up there saying, look, this is an American tradition that is under threat because we can't help ourselves. We're going to spend for talent and then we're going to be canceling other sports and doing all these things. that certainly would get some, I think, some sympathetic ears to say, wait a minute, let's dig deeper into this. We certainly don't want to see other people hurt. And then I do think there would be some legislators that would say, wait a minute now, we have Old State U in my state, but we've also got a lot of mid majors and smaller
Hmm.
conference teams. And if they're cut out of the NCAA tournament or they're cut out of I mean, you see what I consider to be unreasonable statements from legislators that when their team is left out of the college football playoff, all of a sudden they want a congressional
Yes.
investigation,
Yes.
which I find absurd.
Yeah.
Yes.
That notion that Congress, any congressman would get involved in whether their team was the 13th or 11th best team in the country to get in the college football playoff, or if they're left out of the NCAA tournament. Just that's nonsensical to me. But you could certainly have situations like that where you could see, okay, that could get a groundswell of people saying, look, we got to protect the smaller institutions in our states that are our constituents as well.
So I get that brings me to two questions. One is you when all the dust settles, I suppose, when this comes, because I think you've been talking about contracting. We've been talking about that for a couple of years now too. That seems inevitably where it's going to end at some point, which will probably restrict the player movement a little bit because there'll be a cost to buying out contracts and things like that. How do you put on? Do you think the game is going to change in the sense that players have 4 years of eligibility? You have some limitation in transfers set up by another entity like an NCAA or something else, or do you think it's just going to be kind of you could be in a team for 8, 9 years? How do you think that would work out?
I'd be surprised if we were in a situation where you could see a player playing at a place until he's 40 years old. Um, I mean, I'm sure that's a possibility, and there are legal avenues to challenge sort of an eligibility limit of 5 years to play four or something like that we've always
Yeah.
had. I just don't feel like there are enough players out there that are going to go, yeah, I'll do this for the rest of my young years. Maybe. I mean, we'll see. I it's not like I had some crystal ball and I was looking at the way things would be once players were compensated. I did think that players would stay longer in college if they were compensated, and I think we're
Hmm.
seeing that. There's
Oh
really
yeah.
not enough data to make any long-term conclusions, but I think we're seeing, the second round, and I've been doing the NBA draft for ESPN for 23 years now. The second round this last year wasn't as powerful as it's been. And I do think it's because players stayed in school longer. Rather than be a second round pick, why not go back to school and make even more money than you can make as a second round pick? Work to get to the first round where there's guaranteed money and things like that. Go when you're ready type of deal. I think that's helpful for the college product. Certainly, the colleges get more years of service out of a player. That's a good thing. But also, if you're a believer in education, players are staying in school longer, and that means they're furthering their education. So who could argue with that? I think it's nothing but a good thing. We are seeing with the transfer portal a difference in recruiting. You're
Right.
not seeing as many what I would call secondary recruits go into Power Five schools. I think a lot of the coaches are saying, why shouldn't I take a junior transfer? So for Michigan State, why not take Trey Fort instead
Sure.
of taking a freshman who you'd have to take a couple years to develop? Bring in somebody who's ready right now. What's the difference in whether you have a freshman with no college experience or Trey Fort that has, very little Power Five experience? I mean, he played 1 year at Mississippi State, but that's what a lot of coaches are looking at. And but to your point about contracts, like I think that's a good one. Like you sign a player to a contract, you can bargain at arm's length with the player for a buyout provision in the contract. So you put a buyout big enough in there, and the player's probably not going anywhere.
Hmm.
And now maybe a player will say, "Look, I'll take less money for the ability to move." Like if I find at the end of the year you were lying to me or this didn't work out, I want to be able to move. So I'll take less money and no buyout. Maybe that's what they would do. I don't know. But this thing about having a restriction on players, most people don't know this, but the transfer restriction where you had to sit out a year when you transferred, that only existed in five sports. It was
Right.
football, basketball, men's and women's basketball, baseball, and hockey, I believe. Every other sport you could transfer and be eligible right away. So the NCAA knew they were going to lose in court when they had because that made no sense. And the transfer restriction was called a year in residence. And the theory was that a transferring player needs to have a year to acclimate him or herself to the new school. You're like, well, they only have to do that in 5 sports. And by the way, freshmen don't have to acclimate themselves and they have zero college experience. They're
Right.
eligible right away. Like, what are you talking about? None of it was based on principle and none of it made any sense. But the coaches who wanted the transfer restriction wanted it because they didn't want their players to leave.
Sure.
That's
Yeah.
all it is. They wanted a disincentive for players to leave because players and myself included, I wouldn't want to give up a year of my life to go to another school. So a lot of players stuck it out a little bit longer because they're like,
Right.
geez, I'm gonna have to. I might as well give this a shot for another year. I don't want to sit out at some place and give up a year of my life and be a 23-year-old senior. I don't want to do that. Maybe they want to do it now. I don't know, but I the transfer restrictions didn't make any sense. They were going to lose in court. They're gone and they're not coming back. So the transfer portal is here to stay. The only way that you have to get players to stay, to incentivize them to stay, is going to be sign them to multi-year contracts and put a buyout provision in there where it would cost them to go.
And what do you think the tipping point is to get administrators to finally just say, all right, that's just the way we're going to have to go now. We're going to have to treat you as employees, sign contracts, and not having this amateur status or whatever you want to call it. We're just sharing revenue without actually still seeing your employed status, like with a house settlement. What,
Oh, it's here. It's here.
I mean,
They don't even
you
have to
think they're already
decide it.
ready to do that now?
Yeah, it's here.
ADs?
So,
Okay.
so they were, look, I mean, I didn't anticipate collectives popping up. Who would have?
Hmm.
But I think what that showed is these schools want to pay the players. Like they want the best talent and they'll do what it takes to get it. And so they're going to compete in the marketplace for talent, just as they do for coaches and administrators and all that. When they didn't have to do it, it was to the Power Five's benefit.
Sure.
The one thing that had, and so just principles of economics. Like, look, I'm not suggesting that Central Michigan can ever be the equal of Michigan State. Who would suggest that? That's not going to happen. But the truth is, with being allowed to compensate players, now Central Michigan has access to better players than they've ever had before. And they're still going to get the same caliber of player falling to them, if you will, that they always have. But now they can go out and make an offer to, maybe, just for argument's sake, maybe they can make an offer to Michigan State's fifth best recruit that's going to be better than Michigan State's willing to pay their fifth best recruit.
Sure.
So they have an opportunity now that they never had before. And that's one of the things that coaches at Power Five schools are complaining about, is they can't maintain the same kind of depth that they could. Like
Hmm.
Nick Saban at Alabama, before players were paid, he could stockpile players, and his third string cornerback might have been all SEC at another place, and they'd be willing to stick it out for a couple of years and not play as much because of what they would get out of it. But now, when they can be paid their worth, you're not able to stockpile guys like you could before. So that's changed, and it's made things a little bit more difficult. It's spread talent around, maybe not to Central Michigan, but it's certainly spread talent around the Big Ten. So the Big Ten is more competitive. The bottom teams in the league are way more competitive now than they were 5 years ago, or at least can be.
And so then the natural extension of that, of course, is that you get private equity, you have other corporations, you have a dissociation, I guess you could say, from the athletic department from the university, right? Because now you're running, I guess, a more open business of athletics, and you're no longer under the. I guess you're no longer. It's not as much about academics, I guess you could say, whatever. But that you can have you can see private equity looking at that opportunity coming in, or privatizing these athletic departments. I mean, don't you think that'd be the next thing?
They're already there. So and this happened years ago. So I don't know how many years ago, decades, where the universities basically said, all right, athletic department, you gotta pay for yourself. Like we're tired of taking university funds and subsidizing the athletic department. But when they did that, I don't think the universities anticipated how much money athletics was going to make in the future. So then all of a sudden you had 100 million plus revenues at these different schools, and it's continuing to rise. So then what the universities would do is they would be siphoning money off the athletic department. And the athletic department at all these schools, and I haven't looked at the books, but I would assume Michigan State is the same as most of these others, that they're paying pretty hefty fees to the school. So they're paying not only scholarship costs, so the athletic department is paying the school for scholarships. So the truth is, Michigan State isn't out a nickel for any player that's going to school there. They're paid in full. It's just coming from the athletic department. So it's like me moving money out of my right pocket into my left pocket and then claiming my right pocket is empty. And I'm poor. My right pocket is poor. So they're also paying rent and maintenance, like outrageous food service costs. And look, I can tell you stories about schools that they'll start their road trips. They start a road trip and they go eat on the road on the way to the airport. So they're not paying the university the exorbitant food costs, and they get a better meal for less money somewhere else. That stuff has been happening for years. They didn't anticipate the schools or excuse me, the athletic departments were going to make this much money. And that's also why we have so many sports now. The Southeastern Conference, I believe, school to school has about 18 varsity sports. I don't know what it is in the Big Ten, but it's in the 20s. Where I went to school, Duke, I think they have 27 or 28 varsity sports. They had like 14 when I was in school there. So you kind of have to ask yourself, all right, what's the right number of sports? I don't know what the right number is. Like, pay for whatever you want. But when they say, well, we're not going to be able to afford this, that's nonsense. Of course they can afford it. But it just sort of strains the mind that when a Southeastern Conference school is paying their strength coach $1.5 million a year to tell somebody to lift that weight, that their quarterback is worth less. That's nonsense.
So just a quick reminder too, that if you need your windows cleaned, Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids is a great choice. They've taken care of my house. They do fantastic work. They get the Grand Rapids area. You get 15% off if you mention Final Four when you get your estimate. You can of course, do that at tffinots.com/support. And if you like the cool swag I'm wearing, I know this is not the right colors for Jay, but it's green and white here.
It is. I wear that all the time.
Oh,
I got
okay.
a bunch of Michigan State gear.
All right. We need to get it from Nudge. They're great sponsors of the show. They also have all the great apparel. This is screen printed in the softest, most comfortable t-shirts and sweatshirts and quarter zips and everything. You're not going to get away with the quarter zip by the court side, but maybe you can put it under your suit. No one notice. So
Yeah,
head on over to
probably wear it underneath.
head on over to Nudge Printing at nudgeprinting.com. 20% off if you just type in Final Four as one word at checkout. So I think that pretty much covers a lot.
I had one more quick
go ahead,
one, Eric,
Rod.
before we go.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of talk recently, Jay, about the expansion of the NCAA tournament. And I want to get your take on that. I was kind of surprised. Tom Izzo was interviewed about this a few days ago, and I was surprised to see that he was in favor. And his rationale was, well, we seem to have an ever increasing number of schools playing D1 basketball, so why not increase the available spots in the tournament a little bit? Curious to see where you land on that.
I kind of see it. I see both arguments. I probably lean more toward what's the point? Like, I just don't see the point of letting in sub 500 teams in their league.
Right.
You can certainly make the argument that they're just as good as this other team. But to me, look, this is my belief. I'm not expecting anyone to agree with this, but while the first four in Dayton is really good competition, and I watch it and I consume it, the tournament doesn't start till the 64 team bracket.
Absolutely.
And that's why with all these bracket challenges, nobody cares how you did in your first four predictions. The only thing they care about is how do you do it. It doesn't start until the 64 team bracket that first Thursday. And So if they want to take it 72 or 96 or whatever they want, go ahead. Like, fine. If they want to act like the first round is going to be the Poland Weed Eater Bowl, go ahead. I don't see why you mess with something that's been that great. But when I was a kid, it was a 32 team tournament. I played in the first 64 team tournament in 1985. The first year I played in the NCAA tournament, my team was a seeded team. We had a bye. We didn't play in the first round. We got a bye into the second round.
Yep.
So, I can't remember whether it's 54 teams or whatever it was, but it wasn't 64. I didn't go to 64 until my junior year of college was 1985. So I played in the first one. And I'm sure there were arguments that said only one team per conference is fine, and we should do it that way. It makes the regular season more important. But I do think they found a sweet spot at 64, and it's worked out
Yeah.
really well. When they added the extra teams because somebody was going to be left out of an automatic bid. That was the whole purpose of this. Was there was expansion and somebody was going to be left out, so they concocted this first four business. I don't really care for having a team that's in the middle of the bracket being taken out and having to play their way into the bracket.
Yeah.
To me, it should be like the last teams in should play for that. And they're going, well, they're always small college teams. I'm like, so what? Like, this is competition. At some point, we have to admit this is competition. And it's not like everybody gets a trophy type of deal. But reasonable minds can differ on that. And if their broadcast partners are good with it, fine. But I don't, it doesn't move me. Like, I'm not going to be sitting there going, God, I can't wait to see, team number 96 play team number 84 in whatever they want to call this new thing, like if they call it the first round or whatever. And the other thing I don't care for is I don't think we should be throwing banana peels in front of the best teams. And you start adding games, and if the best teams have
Yeah.
to play 7 games to win it now, don't care for that. I don't
Yeah.
think it's the right thing. 6 is enough. It's probably too much.
Yeah.
But if they can give the better teams some buys or things like that, which they do in these when they went to bigger conferences, the best teams don't play until the quarterfinals or something. I'm good
Right.
with
Right.
that. But if it's going to be everybody just adds a game, I'm not a fan of that.
Yeah, I think you make a really good point because, especially given that we're talking about a single elimination format, you're not playing a best of. The more games you have to play, even as a superior team, the more opportunities there are for an upset. And we all know those things happen in college basketball. So
Upset or somebody getting hurt.
that too.
Sure. That
Yeah.
too. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Jay, thanks so much for coming on. The Final Four is not on the schedule. We really appreciate it. This is a great annual adventure for us in every summer, and it's amazing how much things change just from year to year. So, not discounting my health condition here as my droopy face. So I appreciate looking at my mug the whole time. Thanks again for coming on.
No, thank you for having me always. Good luck with everything.
Yeah. All right. So until next time, the Final Four is not on the schedule. Go green.